Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Testing.
1, 2.
Hello.
All good.
All right. Hey. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Welcome. My name is Ty. My spirit animal is Godzilla, and I eat sriracha for breakfast every morning. To the left of me is Jeremy, who moonlights as a sexy female ninja. And
Only on the weekends.
and to my right is the man, the myth, the legend, Brian Betcha, who once suplexed a cybernetic T-Rex wearing a bolo tie. Now, if you're wondering if he was wearing the bolo tie or this cybernetic T-Rex was,
The answer is yes.
And welcome to the Way of the Fist, a look into fighting games. We are here to talk to you about the history of the fighting game genre, where it started and where it's going. And we're also going to be taking a look at games that not only that we enjoy, but we feel like that you guys might enjoy as well. If you're new to the genre, how many people are kind of relatively new to fighting games, if at all? All right, cool. Well, you know what? You're in luck. So, without further ado, Ryan, will you start us off?
Well, I will start us off, and I'll start us off with a very important definition, because if we're going to talk about fighting games, we have to be sure that we're addressing the question, what makes a fighting game?
Yes, what does make a fighting game?
There are a lot of different aspects that go along. Well, let's start by defining our terms a little. Why don't we start with the most pedantic answer? How about fighting? Well, I mean, lots of games involve fighting, but like classic brawlers, things like Battletoads and Double Dragon, River City Ransom, and the Golden Axe series. Even massive army fighters like the Dynasty Warriors game involve fighting, so that can't be enough. Oh, I know. How about martial arts? That's gotta be it, right? No, not so much. Most of the fighters that are big, big popular sellers now, like the Smash Brothers series, really aren't martial arts. The characters aren't martial artists in the strictest sense. You have the Darkstalker series, where the characters are just movie monsters. I know. A tournament. Fighting games always are all about some kind of big worldwide tournament, yeah? Except for games like Project Justice or the Soul series. One of them is a police investigation and the other one is a treasure hunt.
Oh yeah.
And none of these definitions really take into account what about games based on sports, things like UFC, pro boxing, or WWF wrestling. So we really need to lay down a simple and consistent definition that we're going to be working with throughout the rest of this panel. So we're going to go off of the TV tropes snippet. A game made up of duels between two characters, and the operative word there is duel. Alright, so with all that in mind, we're ready to start with the earliest known example of the fighter genre, which is a game called Heavyweight Champ, released by Sega in 1976. Many people probably know this game better by the remake that came out in 1984, I believe. This was where you're looking at a wireframe, looking through a wireframe box and actually punching your opponent. This game was not that sophisticated. It was little more than an exercise in sprite animation. Basically, you had a controller, a single controller like a boxing glove, and you could either punch high or punch low, and your goal was to just rack up the most number of hits before time expired. Now, this was a big step up from the simple box, block, and bar graphics of many other contemporary video games, and it mostly proved the concept that characters could be animated throwing punches at each other. But in terms of competitive challenge, there really wasn't anything. A lot more finesse would be brought to bear 3 years later with something called Warrior. Oh, please. First technical snag. Oh, that's right. It was an arcade-only release with side view visuals and a more popular remake in 1987. So, okay, Warrior. Wait, damn it, not that Warrior! Dang it! Not that Warrior, this one. Warrior is a game that was published in 1979 by Vector Beam, originally developed by a gentleman named Tim Skelly. And it's considered the first true competitive fighting game ever created. The concept was pretty simple, as you can see, with the vector graphics that are going on the screen. That is actual gameplay footage. The background is not part of the game itself. It was a screen that was pasted over the arcade cabinet's monitor. Two knights are having a duel with swords. There's a countdown timer constantly running, and players are earning a point for every strike. Now, this was competitive. This actually involved two players controlling two knights and fighting each other. Let's see, very simple joystick and button controls to play this game. But it was very, very limited by then current technology. This is a game that shot for ambition and ended up falling flat on its face. Because ambition couldn't match up with the technology. Tim Skelly originally wanted 2 sticks for each player to control. One stick would control the knight, the other would control the direction of the sword. This was impossible. Oops, there we go. This just wasn't possible. It wound up being way too complicated for the processors at the time. So it was scaled back to just a single stick and a toggle button. You know, you press the button and when you want to switch from the sword to the player, so that's where you get the weird, clunky kind of lightsaber, touchy, and explodey method of gameplay. A lot of gameplay limitations are severely hampered by technology in every instance of video games coming to the fore, which is why it'll take another 5 years before we get to the true godfather of the genre, a game called Karate Champ. This was released by Technos Japan and Data East. Developed by Technos Japan, released by Data East into arcades in 1984. And the premise of the game is fairly straightforward. You play one of two up-and-coming karate fighters that are trying to reach Grandmaster status, and it was built around the rules of freestyle karate. This game introduced a lot of conventions that would define nearly every single arcade fighter that follows in its wake. Things like a best-of-3 matches format. You got a single player against a computer-controlled opponent for much of the game, but 2 players could drop in and you could have a 2-player competitive duel. There's also bonus stages. This was the first game to include bonus stages in between rounds of competition. But there are quite a few things that it lacks from its descendants. Unlike Warrior before, you got processing power at this point in time that's strong enough to render a lot more in the way of inputs and visuals. To control this game, the player had 2 joysticks, and by moving them in opposing directions, you can come up with about 14 or so possible moves in the fighter's arsenal. But it's being based around freestyle karate rules, there are no light bars. Based on, the match keeps going until one of the fighters scores a direct hit. And based on its level of effectiveness and power, the fighter is awarded either a half point or a full point. And whoever gets to 2 points first, or has the highest score after the end of 3 matches, wins the round. If the player wins, they get to participate in a lighthearted bonus stage to earn even more points. Things like smashing plates and little ceramic things that are thrown at you, or stopping a charging bull by punching it in the face really hard. But the goal of the score is to keep going until you reach past the 9th dan of Grand Mastery. There wasn't a great deal of critical reception for this game, but Karate Champ definitely made its mark on the industry, and it's the primary influence on the next entry in our list.
And we do apologize for not having footage of bull punching.
Yeah.
Sorry. But we did have footage of this, which I thought made up.
Yi Are Kung Fu, or to say in English, 1-2 Kung Fu. Released by Konami in 1985, it took the basic setup of Karate Champ and they enhanced it further both with graphical and mechanical capability. Instead of just a palette-swapped opponent, now you've got a varied cast of characters that are based all on different weapons or styles of Kung Fu martial arts. And actually, you even have the first female opponents in fighting games at this point. There's hints of a greater story going on in the background. This is just where we're reaching the point where you can actually have something resembling a narrative within your games. The main character, Oolong, fights his way through 11 opponents to honor and avenge his dead Grandmaster father. The game also embraced a brand new industry standard with 1 stick and a single and button inputs, which would be the standard for most games that follow. It's not without limitations, though, in other areas. There are no structure of rounds in this game. Basically, every match lasts until one of the character's life bars is depleted. The main character that you play, Oolong, actually can earn extra lives over the course of this game. There's a lives mechanic involved, too. There's also no directly competitive 2-player mode in this game. How it works with 2 players is instead of facing each other directly as like 2 Oolongs fighting back and forth, basically each player would trade off control of the character every round. Yeah, not until Virtua Fighter would we see a more floaty-based fighting game.
We'll get to that later.
All of these games are going to build a very, very solid foundation as technology continues to improve, and the formula that these games planted, the seed for it begins to bear fruit with the next game on our list. Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Now, here's what Street Fighter. I've never heard of this one. Was it popular? Here we see the better part of improved computer technology having a really big impact on games and the genre itself. We've got a diverse cast of characters from an international scope. They're able to display much more intricate martial arts movesets. Street Fighter, well, I'll talk about this when we get to its shortcomings, but You were able to vary the impact and speed of your punches and kicks in this game for the first time, which and also you were allowed to throw in aerial attacks. Your character could do jump kicks and jump punches, which allowed for a much more versatile moveset and many, many more options for varying your playstyle over the course of the game. And here also we see the first that will become an industry standard that defined the genre from then on, special moves. Projectiles and other high-impact executions to add even more variation. But we don't quite have the plateau of perfection that later installments would give us.
Not even close.
To put it quite simply, this game is terrible. This game is absolutely terrible. It really did have a diverse cast, but it was mostly reserved for all of your opponents. If you played this game, you were basically stuck as playing Ryu. Or if you were a second player, you'd play his exact move clone, Ken. And the only way to play the game as Ken was to start a two-player game, win the round as Ken, and then just keep winning from then on. The special moves were had a big impact on gameplay, but here's the thing, they were also completely secret. And when I say completely, I mean completely. There was no documentation anywhere.
Later down the road, most cabinet arcade fighters would actually have parts around the screen that would show how to do special moves. This game did not.
No. And also they were a lot more complicated to execute than like the straightforward quarter circle forward punch template that we all know and love. The original game, when I say, I'll talk about this a bit as far as inputs go. The original game was shipped not with buttons and joysticks, but with actual impact punch pads. The idea of, if you've ever played a Fist of the North Star style game where you're punching the targets that come up, think about that, but crappier. Basically, how hard you struck the pad was how hard Ryu would punch. It really did not work.
It actually injured players that Capcom had to revise the cabinet.
Yeah, to the standard 6-button light, medium, heavy punch system that we all know and love today. And as far as narrative goes, it's basically stock at this point. You know, Ryu just wants to be. Ryu's like the Incredible Hulk. Ryu wants to be strongest one there is, and that's about it.
He wants to be the very best, like no one ever wants.
Now, each of the titles beforehand, there's a pretty sizable period of time in between each one.
Yes. Now, in the 80s, fighting games were kind of this, less than genre. You had a lot of beat-em-ups that were popular, like Double Dragon and Karateka, and even Black Belt. But none of them really reached a success that would cause a phenomenon in the industry. But then when we get to the 90s, that's when it started to hit its mainstream stride. Due in part to a very fantastic game that you will see now. Released in 1991 by Capcom, the creators of the first game, the game allowed a better system to implement fluid multi-button special moves, an accurate joystick scanning system. It was also the first fighting game to boast a combo system that was actually quite unintentional. The developers actually did not mean for it to be a thing that would become popular down the road. But a lot of skilled players found that if they could do quick enough moves, they could link them together and create more damage to your opponent. And the game allowed for more multiplayer tournament play with a wide selection of memorable and diverse characters. They brought back Ryu and Ken from the first game. They also brought back Sagata as one of the boss players. But they started out with a lot of characters that are so memorable to this day, like Dawson, Zangief, Chun-Li, and of course M. Bison.
Unfortunately, I couldn't do my Chun-Li cosplay today. I'm sorry, guys.
We couldn't fit him into the hose in time. But with success also comes rivalry.
Yes. So the same year, another game was released in conjunction, known as from SNK. Now, Street Fighter II was an arcade phenomenon, but SNK, which was a competitive company to Capcom, had their own plans for a fighting game, and that was Fatal Fury. Fatal Fury was created by Takashi Nishiyama, who was the creator of the original Street Fighter. A little after the failure of the first Street Fighter, he went on to work for SNK and thus created Fatal Fury, which was actually released a few months prior to Street Fighter 2. The game was, as opposed to Street Fighter 2, was a two-plane fighting system where Street Fighter 2 was a one-plane fighting system, one-on-one, where in Fatal Fury you could jump between the foreground and the background in order to kind of psych out your opponent, I guess is what they were going for.
That and projectile evasion.
Yeah, and the gameplay was more focused on the timing of special moves, as opposed to Street Fighter, which was a good blend of using your special moves and the regular moves at hand. But what SNK and the Fatal Fury series is very well known for, and not just Fatal Fury, but King of Fighters and everything that came after, is how difficult and cheap the final bosses are.
Yeah. I have many a tantrum recorded on film to the pain of Geese Howard.
And as you can see here, we have up there Terry Bogard, main series protagonist, and the one I'm wearing the hat of, fighting Geese Howard, the boss of the original game, and just pretty much getting his butt handed to him. And then down there we have a King of Fighters example with Rupel Bernstein, the guy in the red shirt, or the red suit. He was the boss of King of Fighters 2, or Fatal Fury 2, sorry. And as you can see, the players,
I have it on record. The gentleman who is responsible for these videos, these are simple Let's Plays. The gentleman responsible is by no means a newbie to fighting games. Currently, he is playing both of these games on the easiest difficulty setting.
Yes, there's a trope called SNK Boss, which is pretty much a trope held for any final boss that goes outside the realm of what the coding should be allowed for fighting a boss.
Just Geese. Terry goes in with an aerial attack, he blocks it and immediately goes
Now,
with
however,
the cheating master.
while SNK was the competition at the time, the true competition for Capcom and Street Fighter would not come until 1992.
This was fun to make.
Yes. Props to Brian here for that sizzle reel.
Oh, you're welcome.
It has begun. Mortal Kombat 2 was released by Midway Games in the year 1992. It was created by Ed Boon and John Tobias of Midway Games, who the game actually originally started as a Jean-Claude Van Damme licensing deal. Yeah. They wanted to make a game based off Jean-Claude Van Damme, who was an actor that both developers had a fondness for. However, the license did not fall through. However, what they had at the time, they wanted to continue on and kind of make something that could compete with Street Fighter in the arcade. And actually a callback to Jean-Claude Van Damme is Johnny Cage, as you can see, sporting the Bloodsport shorts in Mortal Kombat 1. Now, unlike the animated sprites in Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat wanted to go for the realistic digitized look. They wanted to make the sprites on the arcade cabinet look big. They wanted them to be noticeable. And with this, they took digitized actors, put them in front of a blue screen, and had them do like every frame-for-frame pose. Probably very arduous work, but that was what kind of helped make it stand out. Was Street Fighter had anime, and we had realism, like pseudo-realism in Mortal Kombat. It had a similar fighting system to Street Fighter, and this made it easier for people to get into it, but the main reason why this was simplified was because the system was also more focused on character-specific special moves. Each character was kind of built around the special moves that they would possess in order to, combat each other.